Welcome back. This is day 5 of human reproduction. It's actually our last day of human reproduction. So today our aim, we're going to be finishing up talking about what adaptations in the female reproductive system allow for fetal development. So yesterday we talked about the timeline of events that has to happen in order for that fetus to grow correctly. But today we're going to be talking about what structures need to be present and need to be working correctly in order for that fetus to develop as well. But before you get into that, you guys have got 2 do not questions. So go ahead and pause this video, answer questions 1 and 2, and press play when you're ready to review them. So number 1, the diagram below represents human reproductive systems. Which statement best describes part of the human reproductive process? This one required a little bit of process of elimination, but hopefully you figured out that the answer here is C. Estrogen and progesterone influence the activity of structure C. So in this case, structure C is pointing to the uterus, and estrogen and progesterone are 2 examples of hormones that influence that development and that activity. Number 2, the data in the table below indicate the presence of specific reproductive hormones in blood samples taken from 3 individuals. An X in the hormone column indicates a positive lab test for the appropriate levels necessary for for normal reproductive functioning in that individual. Which processes could occur in individual 3? So for this example, we only need to look at the last row of this data table, looking at these samples or the blood samples of individual 3. And we see that they only have one hormone present, and that is testosterone. So using that information, we could figure out that the production of sperm is going to occur in individual 3 because testosterone is that male hormone that influences the production of the male gamete known as sperm. All right, now today I said we're going to be talking about the structures that are needed for fetal development, and I will warn you now, we're going to be looking at some pretty, I won't say grotesque, but pretty graphic pictures of fetal development. But stick with me, they're going to be really cool, really interesting, and I think exciting. So there is a lot of reading for today's lesson, so bear with me as we read through these passages. As we read through these, I want you guys to be annotating anything you think is important. So highlighting any important phrases or making connections to what we already know. All right, first up today, we're learning about the placenta. So the placenta has been described as a pancake-shaped organ that attaches to the inside of the uterus and is connected to the fetus by the umbilical cord. The placenta produces pregnancy-related hormones, including chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, estrogen, and progesterone. The placenta is responsible for working as a trading post between the mother and the baby's blood supply. Small blood vessels carrying the fetal blood run through the placenta, which is full of maternal blood. Nutrients and oxygen from the mother's blood are transferred to the fetal blood, while waste products are transferred from the fetal blood to the maternal blood without the 2 blood supplies mixing. So now using that information, go ahead and answer number 1. What is the role of the placenta during pregnancy, and how does it act as both a barrier and a filter? So I know this diagram that I've got on my screen is not the same as the one on yours, but they're similar enough. And you can see that this pancake-shaped organ that is on the side of the uterus is what we know as the placenta. And again, that placenta is attached or anchored to the side of the uterus, and the umbilical cord is attached to that. And this is what allows the maternal and fetal blood supplies to exchange nutrients and oxygen. It connects the 2 blood supplies. But it's also very important because it doesn't allow those blood supplies to mix. This is important because the mother and the baby don't always have the same blood type, so we don't want those blood supplies to mix. Now, I've got a question for you guys. So we know that this placenta is going to be involved with the exchange of nutrients and oxygen. We want to get the oxygen and the nutrients from the mother to the baby, and we also want to get rid of waste products from the baby to the mother's blood supply. So how does that happen if those blood supplies don't mix? Well, I'll give you a hint. Okay, it involves the process we've talked about, where materials are moving from high to low concentration. They're going to go down the concentration gradient, and it doesn't require any energy. Think about, what is that process called? Well, hopefully you remember that that process is known as diffusion. So diffusion is going to be involved in the transfer of these nutrients and oxygen, making sure that materials are able to diffuse from the mother to the baby, and waste products are able to diffuse from the baby to the mother without those 2 blood supplies ever mixing. So super, super important. All right, now we've got a few pictures of what this looks like. So here on the screen, you can see that this baby was born with that entire placenta. Okay, so again, that placenta is going to be that pancake-shaped organ that is anchored to the uterus, but it still has to come out when the baby is born. And we see that the umbilical cord is attached to that baby. We'll talk about that in just a second. But here's another picture of a zoomed in image of the placenta. You can see that there's tons of arteries and veins on the surface. Again, because this is where the blood supply is going to transfer those nutrients and transfer the oxygen between the mother and the fetus. Here's another image of what that looks like. In this image, we see that the umbilical cord has already been cut. We'll again talk about that in just a second. But this large pancake-like structure is the placenta. Again, you see all of the arteries and veins on the surface connected to the umbilical cord, which is actually going to be delivering those nutrients and materials to the baby. Right. Now, I can't personally speak to this, but many people have told me, I've read many accounts, that the placenta is actually very nutritious. And some mothers, after they give birth to their child, choose to eat this placenta to kind of gain that nutritional value. But if you aren't really interested in maybe just like popping this bad boy on the grill and chopping it up like a steak, you can also send it off to companies to get it encapsulated, where you can get that get your placenta turned into capsule form. You can kind of take it as a multivitamin every single day. Now, again, I can't speak for this. I've never done it, but here are some of the benefits that have been reported. So women have been reported improved mood, increased energy, improved lactation, less bleeding, regulation of hormones, reduced pain, improved sleep, improved mother and infant bonding, and much, much more. So check in with your mom or your dad and see if anyone you know has eaten the placenta. I'm actually very interested to find out more about this. But again, I've never done this, so I can't personally speak on it. It sounds intriguing though. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the amniotic sac. So I know you might be wondering what the heck is happening in these two images, but bear with me. We're going to read through this passage first, and then I'll return to what's actually happening in these GIFs. So one thing we need to know is that all eggs develop in a fluid environment. For animals that reproduce in the water, such as frogs, this is no problem. But for animals that reproduce on land, like us, the need for a watery environment poses an important problem. The solution to this problem actually evolved millions of years ago. And the solution is that a series of membranes forms around the developing embryo. The most important membrane, the amniotic sac, has three main functions. It surrounds the embryo, protects the embryo, and holds the embryo in a fluid that cushions it or protects it. Due to this amniotic sac, land animals develop in water just like those in aquatic environments do. So now let's return to what's actually happening in these videos. So if you look at the one on the right, you can see that this baby was actually delivered still intact in its amniotic sac. This is likely due to the result of a C-section, where the baby was actually cut out from the mother's uterus instead of being born vaginally. And because it's still intact in that amniotic sac, we see that the doctor actually has to cut it out. And as soon as the scissors pierce through that amniotic sac, you can see that water starts dripping everywhere. This is because that baby is born in a watery environment. Now, you might have also heard people talking about when they go into labor, their water breaks. This is what's actually happening. The amniotic sac is bursting and kind of signaling that woman's body like, okay, it's go time. We got to get this baby out. But when your water breaks, that's actually the rupturing or bursting of the amniotic sac. Now, this picture on the left, we said that animals, including ourselves, grow in a watery environment or in a liquid or fluid environment. And this actually means that babies are born with a reflex. They automatically kind of know how to swim. Now, this is not me telling you to go throw your little brother or sister inside the bathtub. Please do not. Don't try this at home. But you can see that this baby on the left is a newborn baby, and yet he's able to swim. This is a reflex that we are all born with. We just innately know how to kind of tread water a little bit because we develop inside that fluid environment and because of our evolutionary history, okay? Now, eventually this reflex does disappear. So unfortunately, you will have to relearn how to swim later, but that's something that's a reflex that we're born with. You don't have to think about it. We just automatically know how to do it, which is kind of cool. Oh, I didn't even answer this question. Okay, let's go over number 2. So how does amniotic fluid help the developing baby stay safe? Well, we need to know that the amniotic sac is going to surround and protect the embryo and hold it in a fluid environment that cushions or protects the embryo. And this is done so that land animals like ourselves develop in a fluid environment. All right. Now, the third thing I'm going to talk about is the umbilical cord. We've actually seen a picture of this already, but let's talk about what we need to know. So the umbilical cord is the lifeline that attaches the placenta to the fetus. The umbilical cord is made up of 3 blood vessels, 2 smaller arteries, which carry blood to the placenta, and a larger vein, which returns blood to the fetus. It can grow to be 60 centimeters long, allowing the baby enough cord to safely move around without causing damage to the cord or to the placenta. After the baby is born, the cord is cut, something the baby's father or mother may wish to do. The remaining section will heal and form the baby's belly button. So your belly button on your stomach, that is where your umbilical cord used to connect to you and deliver those nutrients to you while you were still growing, which is kind of crazy. That is where all of your food and all of your nutrients and your oxygen were delivered. Now, during pregnancy, women may find out that the umbilical cord is in a knot or is wrapped around part of their baby's body. This is common and cannot be prevented, and it usually does not pose any threats to the body. However, sometimes you might find that the umbilical cord is wrapped around a baby's neck, and obviously that does create some concerns. So usually if that is the case, a woman or a doctor might recommend that the woman undergo a C-section, which again is when she kind of has the baby cut out of her uterus through her stomach, or through her belly, I should say, instead of that vaginal birth. Now, what is the role of the umbilical cord in a pregnancy? So we need to know that this is what attaches the placenta to the fetus, which is what actually allows that blood flow between the two. So we talked about the placenta earlier and how we saw all those arteries and veins on the surface. That is where that mother or maternal blood supply comes from. But we need the umbilical cord to actually deliver those nutrients and deliver the oxygen to the baby. So you can see that here in this diagram. This white structure right here is the umbilical cord, and you can see that it is connected into that baby's belly. Now, you might be noticing that they're cutting the umbilical cord pretty high up, and that is because this bottom half of the umbilical cord actually stays or is connected to the baby after birth, but eventually a few days later, it will fall off on its own. So that's kind of gross, but kind of cool. Check in with your parents. See when your umbilical cord fell off your body. I need to check in with mine and see when mine did. Now I've got a few pictures for you. Again, this is that picture of the placenta that is connected to the inside of the uterus. And then this white structure is going to be the umbilical cord that connects the placenta to the baby. This one has already been cut. It's usually a little bit longer than this. Again, here is another picture of that umbilical cord. And here you can actually see those arteries and veins spiraling through this structure. Again, this is what allows the nutrients to be delivered between the placenta and the baby. So making sure the oxygen and the nutrients get delivered to the baby and making sure the waste products like CO2 get out of the baby and return back to the mother so she can get rid of them. All right, now the last thing we're going to talk about today is something called differentiation. So during the next stage of embryonic development, cells begin to move, changing position in a highly regulated fashion until a 3-layered structure called a gastrula is formed. Each layer of that gastrula is going to give rise to particular body parts and body systems of the developing embryo. At this point in development, the rest of the embryo cells are still quite similar to each other. However, the process of cellular changes now begins. As the cells start to develop into muscle cells, skin cells, blood cells, or other tissue types, they begin to join to form organs. Cell differentiation is occurring. All of the cells contain the same genetic information, but each type of cell uses this information differently. By the time birth occurs, all of the major structures of the animal have been formed. So now I've got 2 questions for you. These are kind of tricky, but I think we can figure it out using the diagrams that are on our paper. Now, first question is, why is it that once a fetus begins to look like a human baby, all of the cells in the fetus have the same DNA, but the cells form different structures? How does that happen? And the next question I've got for you is, what even is differentiation? So go ahead and pause this video, answer those questions, and press play when you're ready to review them. All right, so all cells in that fetus have the same DNA, but they start to form different structures and look differently. Why does that happen? Okay, that is because during development, the cells are going to undergo differentiation or cell differentiation and form different types or kinds of cells. So notice that the word differentiation has the word different in front of it. Okay, this is what allows one type of cell or a stem cell, kind of the baseline of cell, to become every other type of cell in your body. So we all start with these stem cells that have the ability to turn into every other type of cell in your body, like muscle cells, skin cells, blood cells, etc. So then what exactly is differentiation? Well, again, we see that word different in front. So differentiation, we need to know, is the process by which cells become specialized in order to perform a different function. So all cells have the same DNA, but they're going to use it to do different functions. So in this diagram, we can see the process of differentiation happening, where a stem cell, again, that kind of baseline cell, just like a basic cell, has the ability to turn into a muscle cell, or a fat cell, or a bone cell, or a sex cell. All of these cells look different and perform different functions, but they're able to turn into those different cells because of the process of differentiation. So this process is what allows cells in your body to become unique and become different types of cells that perform different functions. So I'm saying this word different a lot because we need to associate that word different with differentiation. All right. Now, the very last thing we're going to go over today is this diagram overviewing the structures we need to know for fetal development. So by now, we should know all the structures in this diagram. So go ahead and pause this video. Tell me what structures 1 through 5 are, and then press play when you're ready to review them. So structure number 1, we see structure 1 down here as kind of the doorway between the uterus and the vagina. This is going to be known as the cervix. All right, structure number 2, we see this is going to be that long winding structure that has arteries and veins within it that allows blood supply to be delivered to the fetus. That is known as the umbilical cord. Now, that umbilical cord is directly connected to this pancake-like structure that is attached to the inside of the uterus, known as the placenta. All right, now structure number 4. We've got 2 of these up at the top. Remember, this is where fertilization takes place. And these structures are known as the fallopian tubes. Right, now structure 5 is this sac that the fetus is contained in within the uterus. And this is what allows the baby to grow in a watery or fluid environment. This is known as that amniotic sac that is going to cushion the developing fetus and protect it. Right, now there's 2 structures that I also want to mention that are not in this diagram. And that is this entire structure as a whole. What is this fetus growing inside of? We need to know this structure as the uterus. But I've also got one more structure I want us to know, and that is this inner lining of the uterus. Remember, it's going to build up every month, and then if this baby isn't developing, it will be removed from the body through the menstrual cycle. So that inner lining of the uterus is known as the endometrium. So I'm actually going to write that down. So this endometrium is the lining or inner lining of the uterus. Now, the very first day we started talking about the female reproductive system, I told you guys about something called endometriosis, and I said we would return to this later. So by now, hopefully you've realized that endometriosis has something to do with the endometrium, right? Those words sound pretty similar, but what exactly is endometriosis? Well, I've got a picture for us to look at. So when someone has endometriosis, that means that the endometrium, or the lining of their uterus, grows where it's not supposed to. So here's an image of what that looks like. So in a healthy or normal individual, the endometrium should just grow inside this uterus right here. But with someone with endometriosis, that endometrium can grow in places where it's not supposed to. So you see in this individual, they've got endometrium growing on the top of their uterus, or on the sides of their uterus, or on their ovaries, or on their fallopian tubes. Okay, this is going to cause some problems. My mom has endometriosis, and she had a really tough time getting and staying pregnant because this endometriosis can actually have a lot of fertility problems, or cause a lot of fertility problems. So I'm not saying it's a miracle that I'm here, but it kind of is. You're welcome. But for someone with endometriosis, again, that endometrium is going to grow in places where it shouldn't. That also means that once a month, as that woman's endometrium inside her uterus starts to thicken, it's going to thicken everywhere where that endometrium is present, which means you're going to get a lot of inflammation or swelling on the fallopian tubes or on the ovaries or on the side of the uterus. So wherever that endometrium is present, it's going to cause some inflammation or swelling. Right? So if you ever get cramps that are maybe not where they're supposed to be, so usually when a woman is on her period, she'll get cramps in her uterus, maybe in her lower back. But if you ever notice that you start to get cramps on your hips or on other parts of your body, you might want to get that checked out, because that was really how my mom figured out that she had endometriosis. Is she would get really bad pain on her hips because this endometrium was basically inflicting pain upon her sciatic nerve that runs along her leg. So just something to check in with, see if anyone in your family has endometriosis and see what their experiences have been like. Because if it does run in your family, you are more likely to get it. So I probably have it, if we're being honest. But that's all I've got for you guys today. Sorry to end this on kind of a negative note. But the good news is that endometriosis can be treated, and it's not the end of the world. So using that information, I want you guys to fill out your exit ticket. You've got 2 questions waiting for you. If you have any questions, let me know. But other than that, have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.